How's it going, everyone? Savi from Weather Sponge 5000. Today is November 1st, 2021, and today we're going to forecast the type of conditions you should expect in each region in the United States for the month of November. But before I begin, make sure to subscribe if you want to see more weather-related content. Make sure to like if you like this video, and make sure to turn on post notifications if you want to see even more weather-related content. So let's begin by taking a look at the sea surface temperature anomaly in the Nino 3.4 region, which is right around the equatorial Pacific, and this is a pretty big indicator of what type of conditions we'll experience in November. Is taking a look at the current El Nino or La Nina phases or the forecasts ahead of time, and you see that right now, if we were to take a look at the Nino 3.4 region, which is a region that's synonymous with forecasting whether or not we'll experience a La Nina, an El Nino, or neutral season, you see that the sea surface temperatures have dropped tremendously over the past month, where now we're seeing the sea surface temperature anomaly hover right around 1.2 degrees below average when it comes to the Celsius range. And this is considered a La Nina at this point, because in the equatorial Pacific, all you really need is temperatures at least 0.5 degrees below average to be considered a La Nina. And right now we're 1 degree below average in the Celsius range in the Nino 3.4 region. So right now we are currently experiencing a La Nina, and the forecast provided from the CPC, you see that we're pretty much inevitably going to experience a La Nina for this November, as we have a 90% chance of a La Nina, a little bit over a 90% chance, with a small chance of a neutral phase occurring for the month of November. So we should expect La Nina type conditions for the month of November, and you might be wondering, what conditions will this exactly bring to the United States for this November? Well, take a look at what happens during a La Nina. Typically speaking, during a winter, you see that we typically see colder than average conditions throughout the northern United States, more moist than average conditions along the Pacific Northwest, and more moist than average conditions around the Ohio River Valley, but typically a lot warmer and drier than average during a La Nina winter. But we have to take this also with a grain of salt, at least this graphic, because this really represents what typically happens during a La Nina, and a La Nina during the winter months doesn't exactly mimic what happens during November, during a La Nina in November. So we have to take it with a grain of salt, but but what typically happens in a La Nina during November is fairly similar to what happens during the winter. So we should at least take it into a little bit of consideration, especially since the month of November is pretty much right there to the winter months. So we can't completely disregard it either, but there are certainly some things during a La Nina November that typically don't happen here. So take it with a grain of salt, this graphic with a grain of salt, because it represents the winter, not necessarily November in general. So moving forward to what the temperature anomalies during the month of November during La Nina years. So pretty much I compiled all the La Nina years from 1955 all up until now, and compared the temperature anomaly, the temperatures of these La Nina years to the long-term average of 1991 through 2020 in a climate division plot, which really shows where exactly where you experience cooler or warmer than average conditions during November La Nina. And you see that pretty much the entirety of the United States experiences cooler than average conditions during the month of November, with an emphasis on the southeast coast, which is a pretty stark contrast of what you typically see in a La Nina during the winter months, where it's typically warmer and drier along the southeast coast as a result of a La Nina. So this is definitely something we need to take into big consideration when making this November forecast, because this really gives good evidence of what really happens during a La Nina during the months of November, because we pretty much took over 10 years of data during a La Nina, compared it to a long-term average, and it really has a strong consensus that during the month of November, it's a lot colder than average throughout the United States, with an emphasis more on the southeast. So I'd say in general, most of the United States for the month of November should experience a cooler than average year based off of this plot, but there are still other factors we need to pay close attention to that this plot isn't necessarily taking into consideration, because of course every year is different and not all these La Nina years are exactly the same when it comes to their current conditions. So we can't completely take this and run away with it. Just that it's going to be colder than average throughout the United States. However, I think this is the best indicator that for majority of the United States, it should be colder than averaged for this November. Now, taking a look at the precipitation anomalies during a La Nina November, I pretty much did the same thing, compared all the November La Nina years to long-term average, which extends from 1991 to 2020, and you see that it's typically a lot more moist than average along the west coast in general, with an emphasis more on Oregon and Northern California, as well as the western part of Washington State as well. But you see that it's drier than average towards the southeast, with emphasis more on the Atlantic coast of the southeast, which includes the Carolinas, Georgia, and even extending to Florida. So we typically see drier than average conditions during a La Nina November, which isn't anything surprising from what you'd see from La Nina during the winter months, because we typically do see drier than average conditions throughout the southeast during November. During a November La Nina, so during winter La Nina. So this isn't really atypical of what you'd experience during a La Nina during the winter, but you see that we see more moist than average conditions along the west coast, which again kind of coincides with what happens during a La Nina in the winter. So no surprises here. So based off of this, I'd expect more moist than average conditions along the west coast, with an emphasis more on the northwestern portion of the United States, while the southeast, most of the southeast should experience drier than average conditions for this November during a La Nina November. But there's still other things we need to take into consideration, because like I said, not every La Nina year is the same during the month of November. Taking a look now at the computer models forecast when it comes to the temperature anomaly, you see that it's forecasting majority of the United States to be warmer than average, which pretty much contradicts exactly what the historical data typically states. The only region where it's at least in agreement with what historical data is pretty much in the southeast, where it is expecting cooler than average conditions, but majority of the United States in the computer models forecast is warmer than average. But I take it with a grain of salt, because typically weather is forecasted based on completely on historical data, and when we're seeing a computer model contradict what historical data says, it's really hard to take it very seriously when it completely contradicts historical data, which is the primary basis of weather forecasting. So I'd take this forecast with a huge grain of salt. I'd still forecast it to be cooler than average for most of the United States, but we can't completely disregard it. But I'd say more likely than not, it should be colder than average for most of the United States based on what historical data is saying. Outside of maybe the southwestern portion of the United States, because it's still currently experiencing a drought, which is the one part I do agree on with this computer model, that it should be warmer and drier than average along the southwest coast. But outside of that, I'd still expect it to be colder than average for most of the United States. Now taking a look at what's to come over the next week during November, because of course we are already in the month of November, so it's good to take a look at what's going to happen over the next week to really give a good idea of how our November will turn out in terms of temperature anomaly. And while it's only a small fraction of November, it still plays a big role in the overall forecast of whether or not you'll experience much colder than average conditions or much warmer than average conditions. And if we were to continue to move forward, you see that over the next week, most of the eastern half of the United States is going to be experiencing colder than average conditions, which completely coincides with what historical data states, where we typically do see colder than average conditions throughout the eastern half of the United States and majority of the United States in general. The outliers are right around the southwestern portion of the United States, where it's going to remain warmer than average over the next week or so. But you guys are currently in a drought, and climatology plot isn't detecting that based off of previous La Nina years. So it is expected we should see warmer than average conditions towards southwestern United States, but you see that the eastern half of the United States over the next week, it should be colder than average, which kind of coincides with what the historical data typically states when it comes to La Nina Novembers during the past. So that's something we need to take into consideration as well. Over the next week, it should be colder than average, so there is that good possibility for most of the eastern half of the United States that you guys will experience a colder than average November, because it could be so cold during the first week of November that's going to be really hard for temperatures to completely rebound back and potentially create warmer than average November overall. So I'd say it should be colder than average for most of the northern United States, but it should be a stark contrast in the southwestern United States, where you guys are currently experiencing a drought. If we were to take a look at the Drought Monitor, as of right now, you see that the West Coast is still experiencing drier than average conditions and has been in a drought for over a year now. And the thing is, when it comes to droughts, they're very hard to get rid of because there's just a very big and dominant ridge that's just very hard to get rid of. And when there isn't any moisture in the atmosphere, there's less evaporation, less condensation will occur, and we'll see this endless cycle where the atmosphere will never moisten up during a drought. So it's very difficult to get rid of a drought unless a very powerful external force moves into this big ridge that's been staying over the same area for quite a while along the West Coast. But while I do expect it to go away in the Pacific Northwest, I don't think the same will occur in the right around the southwestern United States as a result of, because during a La Nina, we typically see drier than average conditions overall during the winter time. So it's pretty much gonna keep the drought going towards the southwestern portion of the United States. It isn't the case for the northwestern portion of the United States, because we typically see a Pacific jet move through during a La Nina, bringing a lot of troughs to the region. And we're already seeing the drought get mitigated right around the west coast of Washington at this point. And I think we slowly should be returning back to normal levels when it comes to Drought Monitor right around the Pacific Northwest, but I don't think the same will occur in the southwestern United States. Now, knowing that drought will likely occur and for a prolonged period of time and into November, it's safe to forecast not only a drier than average November for the southwestern portion of the United States, but a warmer than average November for the southwestern portion of the United States, because of course when you guys are in a drought, there's less clouds in the sky, and of course less UV radiation or shortwave radiation from the sun gets reflected back into space by the clouds, or gets and more shortwave radiation gets absorbed by the surface, which means that it'll heat up the area more. So I'd expect it to be warmer and drier in the southwestern portion of the United States during the month of November as a result of a prolonged drought that's expected to extend into November. So that's something we need to keep in mind. Next, let's take a look at the sea surface temperature anomaly, because this of course does have pretty large regional effects when it comes to when it comes to the conditions you'll experience during a given month or during a given time frame. You see that the sea surface temperatures along most of the Atlantic and the coast especially is warmer than average, and what this could mean is that the sea surface temperatures might warm up conditions a little bit along the coast, since the sea surface temperatures are warmer than average. But what this also could mean is that you're more likely to experience maybe nor'easters along the east coast because there's a higher amount of instability. And for the Great Lakes, you might experience more snow as a result of the warmer Great Lakes, because that'll enhance the instability in that region. So I think for the Great Lakes region, the warmer than average sea surface temperatures, believe it or not, will actually make it cooler in the long run for November, because that will enhance the lake effect snow. And of course, when there's more snow in the ground, that means more short wave radiation is absorbed by the snow, because the short wave radiation is trying to break down the H2O molecules, and during that process, it takes away heat from the air or the area right around the snowpacks, and that will cool down the atmosphere overall in the Great Lakes, I'd suspect. So although the warmer water temperatures around Great Lakes might seem like it'll warm up the temperatures along the coast, I don't think it's gonna stay prolonged, since we're gonna see more snow as a result of warmer than average water temperatures along the lakes. But along the Atlantic coast, I'd expect it to be at least maybe a little bit warmer than average, but I don't think it's going to be enough to mitigate the fact that you guys are still in the La Nina, and that typically brings colder than average conditions to the United States. But I think the warmer than average Atlantic sea surface temperatures will at least warm it up to where it won't be potentially record cold. I think it should at least keep it from being extremely cold, but I still do expect it to be colder than average for most of the United States. Now, taking a look at the Arctic oscillation, you see that while we're in the negative right now, the forecast is that we will rebound back to positive, which could potentially promote warmer than average conditions throughout the United States. But typically it takes a while for the effect of an Arctic oscillation to really impact the United States, so it might not be until late November till we experience the effects of a positive Arctic oscillation, which typically brings warmer than average conditions throughout the United States and less unstable air. So I don't expect it to be a major factor when determining temperature, because I think we're going to see this affect the United States very late. And so I think majority of November still should be colder than average despite positive Arctic oscillation. Taking a look at the patterns, you see that during a negative phase, we see the cooler than average conditions move further southward, but during a positive phase, we see the millibar pressure a little bit higher throughout the United States, and this would mean that it'll typically be warmer than average. So that's certainly something we need to keep in mind when making this forecast. Now, taking a look overall at my November forecast, you see that for a majority of the United States, which includes the Pacific Northwest, the Midwest, the Northeast, and the Southeast, I expect you guys will experience colder than average conditions overall. And this is as a result of a La Nina, which based off of historical data typically brings colder than average conditions throughout the United States. In the Northeast, more specifically, I expect it to be colder than average with average precipitation, because based off of historical data, we typically don't see any major departure when it comes to precipitation right around the Northeast during a La Nina November. So I expect around average precipitation, but colder than average as a result of a La Nina, which typically brings colder than average conditions to the Northeast. And then I expect it to be cold and dry in the Southeast. And this is typically what happens during a November La Nina. I expect it to be extremely cold and snowy for the Midwest for this November, because typically during November La Nina, it very much mimics what happens during La Nina during the regular winter months, where we see a pronounced jet stream dip, colder air, and more troughs moving through. So I'd expect a snowier and colder winter throughout the Midwest as a result of a La Nina. More cool and moist than average throughout the Pacific Northwest. I expect the drought to be mitigated over there as a result of the Pacific jet moving through, bringing a lot of troughs and heavy rain throughout the Pacific Northwest. But I expect it to be warmer and drier than average throughout the southwestern portion of the United States as a result of the ongoing drought and the huge ridge that's just dominating the area, that's bringing very warm and dry conditions throughout the southwestern United States. So this is what I expect for November. If you want a more specific forecast, make sure to comment your area down below, and I'll make sure to give you guys a more specific forecast when it comes to your November forecast. But yeah, guys, I guess that's it for this video. I thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe if you want to see more weather-related content. Make sure to like if you like this video. Make sure to turn on post notifications if you want to see even more weather-related content. And I hope you guys have a good day.